The wind came screaming out of the north, like the devil himself, whipping sand and grit into a roaring wall that swallowed the sky. Silver Creek Valley, New Mexico Territory, 1883. Clara Whitaker hunched low over her mare's neck, one hand gripping the reins, the other clutching the cold steel of her late husband's revolver. Her eyes burned. Her throat felt raw. Yet she did not slow down. Through the choking dust, she caught another glimpse of him. The lone rider ahead, nothing but a dark silhouette melting in and out of the storm. He had appeared from nowhere only minutes earlier, scattering the 3 masked outlaws who had tried to drag her from the saddle. 1 shot from his rifle, 2 more from the shadows, and the bandits had fled like frightened coyotes. Now she chased the man who had saved her life, without knowing if he would be the one to end it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every breath tasted of dirt and fear. Clara Whitaker was 34 years old, a widow for 14 long months, and she had learned the hard way that the frontier did not forgive weakness. The mare stumbled on loose rock. Clara steadied her with a soft word, her voice cracking. "Easy, girl. Easy." Memories flashed unwanted through her mind. The night they brought Jack's broken body back from the mine. The way his hand had still been warm when she touched it for the last time. She had promised herself she would never need another man's protection again. Yet here she was, riding blind into a storm after a stranger whose face she had barely seen. The wind began to ease just enough for the land to breathe. Ahead, the rider slowed his horse near a cluster of jagged boulders and finally turned. Even through the settling dust, Clara could see the strength in his shoulders, the quiet power in the way he sat his mount. 2 long braids of black hair hung down his back. A single eagle feather frayed at the edge moved with the dying wind. He did not speak. He simply watched her approach, dark eyes, steady, unreadable. Clara reined in her mare, 10 yards away, pistol still raised, though her arm had begun to tremble. Dust coated her chestnut hair and the faded blue dress she wore beneath her riding coat. Her wedding ring, and the only piece of Jack she still carried, felt heavy on her finger. "Who are you?" She called out, voice hoarse but steady. "And why did you help me?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if measuring her courage. When he answered, his English was clear low and carried the faint accent of someone who had learned the language in chains. "Names can wait, woman. Those men wanted more than your horse." Clara's grip tightened on the revolver. She remembered the cruel laughter of the outlaws, the way one had grabbed her wrist. A shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. Behind her, the valley stretched wide and unforgiving under the bruised sky. This was her home now, or what was left of it. A small plot of land with a modest house and the 1-room schoolhouse she had built with her own hands for the children of Silver Creek. Most days only a handful of dusty-faced kids showed up, but it was hers. A promise that something good could still grow in this hard country. She lowered the pistol a fraction, though she did not holster it. "I didn't ask for your help," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "But you needed it." Silence fell between them, thick as the dust still drifting in the air. Clara studied him carefully. There was something familiar in the way he carried himself, proud, watchful like a man who had already lost everything once and refused to lose more. She did not know his name yet. She did not know he was called Kael, or that the army had been hunting him for months. All she knew was that he had risked his own life for a white widow he had never met. Before she could speak again, the sound of approaching riders drifted on the wind. Clara turned in the saddle. Her stomach tightened. 4 men rode toward them from the direction of town. At their head was a tall figure on a fine gray horse, her own brother, Elias Thorne. Elias reined in sharply when he saw her, his handsome face twisting with a mix of concern and irritation. Dust clung to his expensive coat. The silver buckle on his gun belt glinted coldly. "Clara, thank God you're safe," he called, though. His eyes flicked immediately to the Apache rider beside her. "I heard there was trouble on the trail. What in heaven's name are you doing out here alone?" Clara felt the old, familiar weight settle back onto her shoulders. Elias had returned to Silver Creek only 3 weeks ago, after years away, claiming he wanted to help her manage Jack's estate, but his help always came with conditions. "I was checking the north fence line," she answered carefully. "Some men tried to rob me. This stranger drove them off." Elias's gaze hardened as he looked at Kael. "An Apache," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "You do well to keep better company, sister." Clara's jaw tightened. She remembered the conversation from the night before, Elias, sitting at her kitchen table, whiskey in hand, telling her the mining company had made him a generous offer for her land. He had smiled when he spoke of the ancient silver vein hidden somewhere in the sacred hills the Apache still called their own. She had refused him then. Now, as Elias's men shifted uneasily in their saddles, Clara noticed something else in the distance, near the only spring still holding water in this drought-stricken valley. A small group of Apache had been driven back by armed riders. Among them stood a young woman with long dark hair holding a water skin tightly to her chest. Her name was Naya. Clara had seen her once before, quietly watching the schoolhouse from afar. The injustice of it burned in Clara's chest like desert fire. Elias leaned forward in his saddle. "Listen to me, Clara. This land is dying. The company can make us rich. All you have to do is sign the papers. Stop fighting what's inevitable." Clara looked from her brother to the silent Apache rider beside her, then to the distant spring where Naya and her people stood watching with quiet dignity. Her hand trembled slightly on the reins. She had buried her husband because of secrets hidden in these hills. She had watched her dreams of a peaceful life crack and crumble under the weight of greed. And now, standing between her blood kin and a man whose people had every reason to hate hers, Clara Whitaker felt something stir deep inside a dangerous, desperate kind of hope. Who was this stranger who had saved her life? Was he the enemy everyone warned her about? Or the only person who might help her protect what little remained worth saving? This story is more than a tale of the Old West. It is a reminder that courage often rides in on the back of those we fear most, and that the land itself may choose who is worthy to call it home. The days that followed the dust storm felt heavier than the sand still clinging to Clara's skin. She could not stop thinking about the silent Apache rider, the way his eyes had held hers without fear or pity. Every night, as she lay in the small house Jack had built, sleep came in restless fragments. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, old Micah Reed appeared at her door. The old miner looked frail, his face pale beneath weeks of dust. He stepped inside without invitation, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Clara, your husband didn't die in no accident. Elias knows things he shouldn't. Be careful, girl. They're coming for the silver. And they'll bury anyone who stands in their way." Before Clara could ask more, 2 rough-looking men dragged Micah away into the darkness. She heard his muffled cry, then nothing but the wind. That night, something inside her broke open. Fear and anger twisted together until she could no longer breathe. She had to know the truth about Jack's death. And the only person who might hold answers was the stranger from the storm. 2 nights later, under a thin sliver of moon, Clara rode alone toward the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would echo off the rocks. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the scrub made her hand drift toward the pistol at her hip. She found him waiting exactly where she had hoped and feared. Kael stood beside a small fire, no bigger than a lantern, its light carefully shielded by stones. He did not seem surprised to see her. Clara dismounted slowly, keeping distance between them. Her mouth felt dry. "You said names could wait," she began, voice unsteady. "Mine is Clara Whitaker. I need to know why you helped me, and what you know about the silver in these hills." Kael regarded her for a long moment. The firelight carved deep shadows across his scarred face and strong jaw. Finally, he spoke. "This mountain has a name in my tongue. It is sacred. My people buried our dead there long before your husband's mine was ever dreamed of. The silver, it has tasted blood before. White men and Apache both." He paused, staring into the flames. "My wife, my son, they died because men wanted what lay beneath the stone. I was away hunting. When I returned, the village was gone. Only ashes remained." His words were few, yet each one landed like a stone in still water. Clara felt the weight of his loss settle in her own chest. She thought of Jack's cold hand in hers on that terrible night and the empty space beside her in bed that had never warmed again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words felt small, but they were honest. Kael nodded once, accepting her sorrow without ceremony. Clara took a shaky breath and continued. "My brother Elias, he's pushing me to sell the land. He says the mining company will make us rich. But I think he had something to do with Jack's death." She told him then not everything but enough. The loneliness that pressed on her like winter cold. The rage that burned whenever Elias smiled and spoke of progress while people suffered. The fear that she was losing the only piece of life she had managed to rebuild. Kael listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving her face. The silence that followed felt alive. Then came the sound of horses. Captain Harlan Voss rode into the small clearing at the head of 8 uniformed soldiers, their rifles gleaming in the moonlight. His face was stern-lined by years of command. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, voice clipped, "you should not be out here alone. These hills are dangerous. We are here to protect the mining interests and keep the peace." Clara's stomach tightened. She recognized the lie in his words. Elias had spoken of protection in the same tone. Before she could answer, a soft movement came from the shadows. A young Apache woman stepped forward, no more than 20, with intelligent eyes and a quiet strength. Her name was Naya. She carried a small bundle of dried plants. Without fear, she approached Clara and held them out. "For fever and pain," Naya said softly. "The mountain gives these to those who ask with respect." Clara hesitated, then accepted the herbs. Their scent was sharp and clean, like earth after rain. For the first time in months, she felt seen not as a widow to be pitied, nor as an obstacle to be moved, but simply as a woman trying to survive. Naya's gentle presence lingered, even after Captain Voss and his men rode on, warning Clara to stay away from hostile elements. Later, alone again with Kael, Clara's hands shook as she unfolded the papers she had taken from Elias's saddlebag earlier that day. The documents were clear. Forged signatures, false dates. Her brother had altered land claims and mining rights, preparing to seize not only her small holding, but the entire sacred mountain. He was willing to sacrifice his own sister to feed his greed. Clara stared at the papers until the ink blurred. A cold wave of betrayal washed over her. "I trusted him," she whispered, voice breaking. "He's my blood." Kael stepped closer, though he did not touch her. His voice was low and steady. Blood does not always mean honor. The weight of his words pressed against her heart. That night, as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, Clara made a dangerous choice. She would trust this Apache warrior she barely knew. Together, they moved in silence. Under cover of darkness, Clara helped guide Kael and a small group of his people, including Naya, as they quietly relocated their thin herd of horses and goats into a hidden canyon where water still flowed and soldiers rarely ventured. Her hands were raw from holding branches to cover tracks. Her mind raced with fear of what would happen if Elias or Captain Voss discovered her betrayal. Yet as she watched Kael work beside her, moving with the quiet grace of someone who belonged to this land, Clara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. A fragile, trembling spark of hope. And with it came a deeper fear, the kind that only grows when a heart begins to open once more. This story reminds us that the heaviest burdens are often carried alone, until we dare to share them with the one person the world tells us we should fear most. The hidden canyon felt like another world. For the next 10 days, Clara rode out every dawn, under the pretense of checking fences or gathering herbs. In truth, she was meeting Kael in secret among the red rocks and twisted junipers of the Sangre de Cristo foothills. Each meeting began with silence. Kael taught her to read the land the way his people had for generations, how a bent blade of grass told of a passing horse, how disturbed stones revealed a man trying to hide his trail. Clara's hands, once soft from teaching children, their letters grew rough and blistered as she learned to move quietly through the brush. In return, she brought the old map old Micah had pressed into her hands the night he was taken. The parchment was faded, its edges crumbling. With her schooling from back east, Clara slowly deciphered the strange markings and Spanish notes scrawled across it. Together, they pieced together fragments of the truth lines that pointed directly to Elias's forged documents and the deliberate collapse that had killed her husband. At first, Clara moved with constant fear. Every distant hoofbeat made her freeze. Every time Kael disappeared into the shadows to scout, she felt the old loneliness rush back and colder than before. She had spent so many nights telling herself she needed no one. Now the thought of depending on this Apache warrior terrified her more than Elias's threats. Yet something was shifting. She began to notice the patience in Kael's voice when he corrected her footing on loose shale. She saw how gently his large hands handled a wounded falcon they found tangled in a thorn bush. The hardness she had first seen in his face softened when he spoke of the mountain's quiet songs. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the western ridges, they sat beside a small, carefully shielded fire. Naya had joined them briefly earlier, leaving behind a pouch of healing herbs and a few quiet words of encouragement. Clara stared into the flames, her shoulders heavy. "I used to believe blood was enough," she said softly. "That family would always stand together. Now I see my own brother would trade my life for silver and a fine house back east." Kael remained quiet for a long moment. The firelight danced across the scar that ran along his jaw. "I once believed only in revenge," he admitted, his deep voice low. "After my wife and son were taken from me, I wanted nothing but to make the soldiers pay. But watching Naya, and now you, I remember there is more to live for than vengeance." Clara lifted her eyes to meet his. In that moment, the wall she had built around her heart cracked just a little more. She saw not an enemy, not a savage as the townsfolk called him, but a man carrying wounds as deep as her own. "I lost Jack because of this mountain secret," she whispered, tears gathering though she fought them back. "He found the old vein and wanted to protect it. Elias made sure he never came home. Her voice broke on the last words. For the first time since the funeral, she let the full weight of her grief show in front of another living soul. Kael did not offer empty comfort. He simply sat with her in the silence, the way the land itself holds sorrow, without rushing it away. Then he spoke again, even quieter. Grief is like the deep roots of the mesquite tree. It drinks from hidden water and keeps the plant alive through the longest drought. But if we let it grow unchecked, it can choke the life from us. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. A strange warmth spread through her chest, not happiness, but something gentler. Recognition. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment. Captain Harlan Voss rode into the small clearing alone. His uniform dusty, his face troubled. He reined in his horse and looked directly at Clara, ignoring Kael for the moment. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, voice tight with unease. "I have questions. Orders I've been given don't sit right with me anymore. Your brother, he's been feeding me information that feels wrong. I need to know what you've seen up here." Clara's heart lurched. Fear and hope collided inside her. She glanced at Kael, who remained perfectly still, watching the captain with calm intensity. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Trusting a soldier who had once hunted men like Kael felt like stepping off a cliff. Yet something in Captain Voss's eyes, a flicker of genuine doubt, told her this might be the first crack in Elias's carefully built wall. She chose her words carefully. "Captain, the only truth I know is that greed has already taken my husband. I won't let it take anything else." Voss studied her for a long moment, then gave a single weary nod. He turned his horse without another word and rode back into the gathering dusk. When the sound of hooves faded, Clara released a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling. Kael moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You did not have to speak," he said. "I know," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm tired of being afraid of everyone, including myself." In the firelight, their eyes met and held. No words passed between them, yet something profound shifted in that silence. A fragile bridge built across years of pain, fear, and misunderstanding. Clara realized she was no longer looking at a stranger or even an Apache. She was seeing a man who had chosen to protect instead of destroy, a man who carried his scars without letting them define him. And for the first time since Jack's death, she allowed herself to feel the dangerous, beautiful possibility of trust. Not blind trust, but the kind that required courage, the courage to look past old wounds and see the human heart beating beneath. This story shows us that real trust is never given easily. It is earned in the quiet moments when we dare to see the person behind the scars and the stories the world has told us to believe. The moon hung thin and sharp above the Sangre de Cristo peaks, casting long silver shadows across the broken rock. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts as she followed Kael up the narrow trail. Her legs ached from the climb, but she refused to slow down. The old map had led them here to a hidden cave mouth, half concealed by hanging vines and fallen stone. Inside, the air was cool and still carrying the faint scent of damp earth and forgotten time. Kael lit a small torch. Its flickering light revealed a narrow passage that opened into a small chamber. There, wedged between two rocks, lay a weathered leather notebook, Jack's handwriting unmistakable, even after all this time. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Page after page revealed the truth she had feared most. Her husband had discovered the sacred vein and tried to keep it secret. Elias had arranged the accident a deliberate collapse to silence him and sell the location to the mining company for a fortune. Tears burned Clara's eyes. She clutched the notebook to her chest, feeling the final piece of her husband slip away. "We have it," she whispered. "This is enough to stop him." Before Kael could answer, a distant scream cut through the night. Naya. They raced down the mountain in desperate silence. When they reached the edge of Elias's camp, the scene froze Clara's blood. Naya knelt in the dirt, hands bound, a pistol pressed to her temple. Elias stood over her, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "Sign the papers, Clara," he shouted into the darkness. "Sign them, or your Apache friend's little pet dies tonight. Then I'll come for you." Clara stepped forward into the open, her heart hammering wildly. The notebook felt heavy in her coat pocket. Rain began to fall, sudden heavy drops that turned the dust to mud. "Elias," she called, voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Let her go." Her brother laughed bitterly. "You always were too soft. Jack was soft too. That's why he had to die." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cruel satisfaction on Elias's face. In that moment, any remaining love Clara still held for her brother shattered completely. Captain Harlan Voss chose that exact instant to strike. He burst from the shadows with 6 loyal soldiers, rifles raised. "Drop your weapons," Voss commanded, his voice ringing with authority and regret. "Elias Thorne, you're under arrest for murder and fraud." Gunfire erupted. Chaos swallowed the camp. Kael moved like a shadow, cutting toward Naya. But one of Elias's men swung his pistol toward Clara, finger tightening on the trigger. Time slowed. Kael froze mid-stride, torn between reaching Naya and throwing himself in front of Clara. His face showed the brutal weight of the choice: save the girl who carried his people's future, or protect the woman who had begun to heal his heart. A gunshot cracked through the rain. But it was not aimed at Clara. Old Micah Reed staggered from the darkness, blood soaking his shirt, an old rifle still smoking in his hands. He had taken the bullet meant for Clara. The old miner's knees buckled, but before he fell, he looked straight at Elias, with eyes full of quiet fury. "You killed my friend." Micah gasped. Jack was trying to do right. "You only ever wanted gold." Elias's face drained of color. His carefully built mask of confidence crumbled, revealing the greedy, cowardly man beneath. He backed away, eyes darting wildly as Voss's men closed in. "No! This wasn't supposed to happen," Elias shouted, voice cracking with panic. "I was going to make us rich." Clara walked slowly through the pouring rain until she stood directly before her brother. Water streamed down her face, mixing with tears she no longer tried to hide. "You took my husband," she said, her voice low but clear above the storm. "You destroyed our family for silver that doesn't even belong to you. I loved you once, Elias. But love without honor is just another kind of lie." Elias stared at her, mouth opening and closing, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he had nothing left to hide behind. Kael reached Naya at last, cutting her bonds with swift, gentle hands. The young woman rose shakily, looking at Clara with gratitude and quiet respect. As Voss's men took Elias into custody, Clara knelt beside old Micah. The old miner's breathing was shallow, but he managed a faint smile. "Tell Jack." "I tried," he whispered. Clara pressed his hand between hers, tears falling freely now. "You did more than try, Micah. You saved us." In the pouring rain, under that thin sliver of moon, Clara felt the devastating weight of what justice truly cost. She had lost the last of her blood family tonight. Yet in their place stood something new, fragile but real. Kael approached her slowly through the storm. Their eyes met, No words were needed. In that moment, he understood that true strength was not in revenge, but in choosing mercy and courage, even when it broke your heart. Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady despite the cold rain. The price of trust had been painfully high. But for the first time, Clara believed it had been worth every tear. This story teaches us that blood does not always mean loyalty, and that real courage is standing on the right side, even when it costs you everything you once held dear. 3 months had passed since that stormy night on the mountain. In a sunlit courtroom in Santa Fe, Elias Thorne stood with his head bowed as the judge delivered his sentence: banishment from the territory and the permanent loss of all claims to the land he had tried so desperately to steal. Clara watched from the gallery, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt no triumph, only a quiet ache where family once had been. Captain Harlan Voss received a promotion that same week, yet he chose to remain in New Mexico. He now rode the hills not as a soldier hunting Apache, but as a guardian helping establish protected lands where free Apache bands could live without fear. Naya had found her place too. She stood beside Clara each morning in the little schoolhouse, teaching both white and Apache children how to read, write, and understand one another's stories. The sound of their laughter drifting across the valley had become one of Clara's greatest comforts. On a warm afternoon in early autumn, Clara and Kael stood together on a gentle hill overlooking Silver Creek Valley. Below them, the once contested mountain lay quiet. The silver mine had been sealed forever, its entrance covered with stone and marked with respect for the sacred ground it held. The land was now shared, a place where both peoples could draw water-graze animals and walk without carrying old hatreds. Clara felt the breeze lift strands of her hair. She glanced at Kael, who stood tall and still beside her, the eagle feather in his braid, catching the golden light. "We did this," she said softly. "Together." Kael turned to her, his dark eyes warm with something deeper than words. The mountain allowed it. We only listened. They had already begun building. A modest ranch house was rising near the school with space for a small clinic where Naya could use her knowledge of desert plants to help the sick. It would be a home, a school, and a meeting place, a quiet declaration that fear and greed did not have to rule this land forever. In the spring that followed, under a sky painted soft pink and gold, their first child came into the world. They named him Tommy. He had his mother's determined chin and his father's dark, watchful eyes, a living bridge between two worlds that had once stood so far apart. Clara held the newborn against her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks as she looked at Kael. The man who had once walked only in shadows now stood in the light, his strong hand gently cradling his son's tiny head. The years began to soften some of the old wounds, though they never fully erased them. Clara still sometimes woke in the night, reaching for the empty space where Jack once lay. Kael still carried the quiet sorrow of the family he had lost. But together, they learned to hold both the grief and the joy without letting either break them. One clear summer night, long after the work was done, Clara and Kael sat side by side on the porch of their new home. The sky above was thick with stars, so many they seemed close enough to touch. In the valley below, small campfires flickered like warm beacons. Families from different backgrounds gathered together, sharing food stories and songs that blended Apache rhythms with old frontier melodies. Clara leaned her head against Kael's shoulder, their fingers intertwined. His hand was rough from years of hard living, yet it held hers with infinite tenderness. "I stopped looking for a piece of land a long time ago," she whispered. "What I found instead is a real home, a place where my heart is finally understood and slowly healing. Kael was silent for a moment, listening to the distant laughter and the soft night wind moving through the grass. Then he spoke, his voice deep and steady, carrying the wisdom of his ancestors. My people say the red earth does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who know how to listen to its whisper. Clara smiled through quiet tears. She thought of the long, painful road that had brought them here. The dust storm, the hidden cave, the stormy night of betrayal, the first fragile spark of trust. All of it had led to this moment. Two scarred hearts choosing each other. Choosing hope, choosing to build something better than what came before. Below them, the campfires burned on. Children's voices rose in play. Naya's gentle laughter mingled with Captain Voss's low chuckle as he sat among the people he once guarded with suspicion. Clara closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of sage and wood smoke. For the first time in many years, the weight on her chest felt lighter. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And in the arms of the man who had walked out of the storm to save her, she had discovered that home was never truly a place. It was the quiet certainty of being truly seen and loved anyway. This story leaves us with a simple yet powerful truth. When we choose courage over fear and understanding over hatred, even the harshest land can bloom into something beautiful, a place where different hearts can finally find their way home. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.